A reading from the Book of Wisdom. Let us beset the just one, because he is obnoxious to us. He sets himself against our doings, reproaches us for transgressions of the law, and charges us with violations of our training. Let us see whether his words be true. Let us find out what will happen to him. For if the just one be the Son of God, God will defend him and deliver him from the hand of his foes. With revilement and torture, let us put the just one to the test, that we may have proof of his gentleness and try his patience. Let us condemn him to a shameful death, for according to his own words, God will take care of him. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
A reading from the letter of St. James. Beloved, where jealousy and selfish ambition exists, there is disorder in every foul practice. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure, then peaceable, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, without inconstancy or insincerity. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace for those who cultivate peace. Where do the wars and where do the conflicts among you come from? Is it not from your passions that make war within your members? You covet, but you do not possess. You kill and envy, but you cannot obtain. You fight and wage war. You do not possess because you do not ask. You ask, but do not receive, because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus and his disciples left from there and began a journey through Galilee, but he did not wish anyone to know about it. He was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after his death, the Son of Man will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question him. They came to Capernaum, and once inside the house, he began to ask them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they remained silent. They had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. Then he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all." Taking a child, he placed it in their midst, and putting his arms around it, he said to them, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. If you're thinking that this week's gospel sounds a little bit like and kind of familiar to last week's gospel, you are right. Last week in Mark's gospel, chapter 8, we heard Jesus' first prediction of his passion. Today we're in chapter 9, and we hear the second prediction of his passion. And there's one more to come. But in Mark's gospel, when Jesus predicts his passion, here's the format, here's the structure, here's what happens. Jesus predicts his passion. The disciples misunderstand it, and then he clarifies for them what it means to follow him. So last week, Jesus predicted his passion. Peter, the disciples in Peter, misunderstood it completely, took him aside, started to rebuke him. Then Jesus had to clarify that what it meant to follow him was to take up your cross and follow him and to lose your life for the sake of the gospel. This week, Jesus predicts his passion. The disciples misunderstand it, not only because they're silent, but because they talk about something completely the opposite of what Jesus is talking about. Who's the greatest? And then Jesus has to clarify for them that to follow him means to be the least and to be the servant of all. In the ancient world, ancient religions at the time of Israel were very different than the biblical or Torah religion of Israel, of the Jewish people. Biblical religion is concerned about proper relationships with God and with one another, whereas most ancient religions weren't necessarily concerned with that as much as trying to please the god or goddess and get what you want from the god or goddess by sort of trying to take control of the situation. There was sort of this way of operating that basically had this thought behind it, that if you had the right words or the right incantations and the right gestures and the right rituals, and you did them correctly and constantly enough, you could, in essence, get from the god whatever you wanted from the god, that you would get control and take what you would need. I think a great example of that is what I talked about, maybe it was 3 weeks ago. We talked about Elijah. Remember, sort of the highlight of Elijah's story was when he called together all the prophets of Baal and said, let's have a competition. Let's find out whose God is really God. And lets the prophets of Baal go first. They picked the best sacrifice, and they spent the day chanting and dancing and hopping around and cutting themselves and bleeding, doing all their rituals so they could get God to give them what they wanted from Baal. This sort of, if I do the right thing, I get control of the situation, and I know the outcome. It's very popular, actually, in our entertainment industry. In television, in TV, in the movies, you see all the time that the adventure is, if we can just get the right elements and mix them in the right way and chant the right things, grab the right totem, we will take control of a power greater than us and accomplish whatever it is we want to accomplish. You could sort of call it kryptonite religion, if you will. That there's Superman with all his superpowers able to completely devastate us unless you pull the kryptonite out of your pocket. And it's like, I've got control now. I'm in charge. You have to do whatever I want at this point, right? Kryptonite religion. I think it's unfortunate that many of us were probably raised with a sense of kryptonite religion. That is to say, you know how it goes. If you get your first Fridays in, your 9 First Fridays, or you say your novena, or you wear your scapular, or you have a devotion to a particular saint, or especially Mary or Joseph, then you'll get what you want. We sort of find a way to take advantage of a flaw in God's personality, and we get from him what we need. All those things, 9 First Fridays, scapulars, devotion to saints, are wonderful and magnificent and beautiful things when done correctly, in proper relationship, as a way of sort of revealing and growing in love of God and deepen our relationship with him. But so often, that's lacking behind what we do. I use myself as an example of it. I was in my 20s when I heard about the 9 First Fridays, the promise being if you go to Mass on 9 First Fridays in a row, you get into heaven. I was like, I can do that. So I did that, right? But it had nothing to do with loving God or wanting to worship God. It had everything to do with my exploiting what I thought was a loophole. So that when I appear before the judgment seat of God, I can say, you don't need to say a thing. I did my 9 First Fridays when I was 20 years old. You've got to let me in, God. And God's going to go, yeah, right, that's the way it works. Exactly. We can do better than that. St. James says, you pray wrongly. We can do better than that. Those who seek a proper relationship with God, the scriptures, as we hear in the first reading, calls that person just, or that person righteous, who seeks a proper relationship with God. And you know the presupposition that Jesus teaches us, that our relationship with God is revealed in the way that we relate to one another, in the way we are with each other in the world. Indeed, Jesus came to show us how to have a proper relationship with God, and with those with whom we live in community, how to love God and how to love neighbor. It's about relationship. But Jesus is also very much aware that the types of relationships he calls us to are very counter to our natural inclination as human beings. To our natural inclination as human beings. Our natural inclination as human beings, think about work, think about school, think about an organization you might belong to, think about the church. Our natural inclination is to put relationships together in hierarchical, control-driven ways. If I have the right words, the right position, do the right thing, I'm in control. I've got the power. And so in organizations, you have presidents and vice presidents and managers and supervisors. You have principals and vice principals and teachers aides. You have pope, bishops, pastors, associate pastors. Everything hierarchical, so that we know exactly what the pecking order is and how it all goes together. You really cannot blame the disciples for their conversation today about who is the greatest. Even if they may realize there's something new coming into existence, they think it's going to play by the same rules. And they're trying to figure out who of us is the greatest? Where does the power lie? Who's in charge? Who's going to supervise? Who's going to make things happen? It's the way we work and organize ourselves, which is why what Jesus says is so revolutionary. He says, no, if you want to be the greatest, you have to be the least and the servant of all. It's not about hierarchy for Jesus, it's about equality for Jesus, that everyone serves each other. I mean, think about that for a moment, how revolutionary that is. Picture your place of work, picture your school, picture the church without hierarchy. Instead, everyone, from the least to greatest in the organization, seeks to do nothing but serve the other people around them. That's it. You begin to think, well, how's that going to operate? Is that going to fall apart? That's going to be a disaster. Because yes, our proclivity to sinfulness, our proclivity to selfishness and our own aggrandizement, our own needs, gets in the way and throws the whole thing off. I don't think that Jesus' followers, I don't think we, can begin to imagine the future he's envisioning when he says, you must be servant to all. It's no wonder those in authority had a problem with him and didn't like him one bit. He was threatening to the way that we as human beings are inclined to put our lives together. I've shared with you before that for one moment in my life, 1 year in my life, I had something of what I think Jesus was talking about. When I was on the national evangelization teams with 11 other people, we were a team of 12. And yes, we all had our roles. This person's in charge of packing the van. This person's in charge of putting on the skits. This person's in charge of doing music. This person's in charge of putting together small groups and so on and so forth. But it was all done within the context of this. You are servant to one another. And the amazing thing was, with 11 people trying to serve me and anticipate my needs, everything I needed was taken care of often even before I knew I needed it, which completely freed me to stop worrying about myself and look after their needs first. It was a remarkable way to live. Empowering, freeing, remarkable. If control is your game, then you want a hierarchy. But that's not what Jesus is after. Because God, in Christ, does not want a power relationship or a control relationship with us. If he wanted that, he could have that hands down. But he wants a love relationship with us, one that leads to service. And to emphasize the point, Jesus takes a child and places it in their midst and embraces the child. And at that time, a child was not seen as some beautiful little illustration of innocence, A child was a non-person, had no social status, was powerless, was vulnerable, was weak. There was no point to a child. And Jesus says, if you cannot embrace a child, if you cannot embrace this non-person, welcome this vulnerable, welcome this weak one who can do nothing for you, then you can't welcome me. You can't welcome the one who sent me. You can't welcome God. I think today Jesus would probably embrace someone with severe Alzheimer's or someone in a coma near death and saying, if you can't give this person the same stature and the same respect as you might give to someone who you think is wonderful and powerful and marvelous, then you're not in right relationship. And indeed, if we can't welcome the vulnerable, the poor, the broken, the helpless, the one who can do nothing for us, then how can we welcome him on the cross? A non-person, no status, vulnerable and broken. In his words and in his life and in how he died, he shows us the truth of what he says today. That right relationship with God and with each other involves becoming the least, becoming servant. He clarifies for his disciples and for us today what it means to follow him. It means to be as God was for us, one who serves, one who takes the position that is least, that is smallest. And in that, a just and righteous relationship with God and with one another is revealed.